Tom, thanks for joining us.
Sean, so great to be here, man. It's so great.
Great to have you here. I cannot wait to hear what you have to say about this topic, because I know you're incredibly smart.
Wow.
You do all of your research. You can back up everything you say with research. You're a clinical nutritionist.
Yep.
You're a speaker. You're a teacher. You're the author of The Elimination Diet, a book I totally loved. Off camera, we were talking.
Yeah.
And there was a quote from Walter Minion that you... Walter Crinion that you said. What was it?
It was interesting, Sean. You know, I have had some conversations with Walter in the past about how chemicals are altering mitochondrial function. So one of the key things that we're seeing behind, many of the diseases we have today, whether it's type 2 diabetes, obesity, inflammatory conditions of the skin, it's mitochondrial related in one way, shape, or form. So I was like, man, what's up? Like, why are we seeing this drastic rise in disease? The only thing that I can correlate with it is the drastic rise in chemical use that we have in our society right now. You know, we have chemical companies bragging in their stock reports that they were able to produce 750 million pounds of BPA more in the year 2012 alone, for example. And we see these drastic rises. You know, we're up to 74 billion pounds of chemicals that are being imported or produced in the United States every single day. That's from American Academy of Pediatrics. So you're like, wow, okay. Is it possible then that the rise in chemicals could be associated with the rise in many of the chronic diseases we're seeing today? And so I was asking the question to Walter, basically, you know, is this what's going on? Is it the mitochondrial disruption by chemicals? And he says, that's the one thing across the board. When we look at each one of the chemicals, as a person who's concerned about environmental toxicology, he says, I look at these chemicals and each and every one of them has some sort of component of degrading mitochondrial function. So whether it's in the electron transport chain, complex 1, complex 2, or whether it's in the Krebs cycle or intermediates or cofactors. So I was like, wow, you know, that's interesting. You know, I wonder if that hypothesis would stick to the wall if we threw it.
Let's go down to the basics. What is the mitochondria?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the energy powerhouse of the cell.
What does that mean?
What it means is it's where you take in your outside sources of fuel, your carbohydrates, your amino acids, you take in your fatty acids, and you turn them into what would be considered cellular currency, something called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. So it's the powerhouse. Good.
So it takes in the nutrients and makes energy out of them.
Absolutely.
Okay, pretty simple. Now, what would oxidative stress be, and how does it impact the mitochondria?
Great, good question. Oxidative stress basically means destabilization, stealing of an electron from the outer orbital of a compound. So let's say you had alpha-lipoic acid. And alpha-lipoic acid normally has a very generous ability to give somebody an electron. Well, when it gives somebody an electron, it's missing an electron, okay? Now, alpha-lipoic acid doesn't behave badly when it's missing an electron. But if you have a toxic, some benzene compound from cigarette smoke, for example, right, and you're missing an electron, that substance will circulate around the body and it will find a tissue and it will steal an electron from that substance. And in doing so, it causes instability. So what I like to say, it's like that neighbor, right? The neighbor who's always calling you up and saying, hey, can I borrow your lawnmower? Hey, can I borrow 50 bucks? Hey, you know, they're constantly taking. They're always unstable. There's something wrong. They've never really had that grounded presence, right? And then there's the antioxidant people, you know, it's like, hey, how can I help you? You know, hey, I noticed your lawn hasn't been cut. Well, can I mow your lawn for you? You know, there's people who are offering generosity. They're giving. So basically, oxidative stress means there are too many environmental people or constituents in your cell that are stealing all the time these electrons. They destabilize.
Okay, so they steal electrons, and the antioxidants give an electron?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's the other way around. Okay, gotcha. Now, real quick, before we talk about what oxidative stress has to do with depression, what are some of the primary causes for oxidation or oxidative stress?
Oh my gosh, you name it, man. So what you can do is you can cause oxidative stress by exciting the immune system. So sometimes the immune cells will go around and attack constituents, let's say harmed cells, or let's say bacterial invaders. And they will actually use something called myeloperoxidase. They'll actually form oxidants in order to combat that particular damage or that particular organism. So you can actually form radicals, it's what they call free radicals, that are unstable and steal electrons by activating the immune system constantly. So inflammation itself can cause that.
Okay.
If you don't have enough of the antioxidants around, you can destabilize in so many different ways. My gosh, any chemical that comes in that can pull off an electron, mercury, for example, is a known toxin that everybody knows about. Oh, it can rob really, really quickly, destabilize a cell and form free radicals. So, absolutely.
So the immune system can do it. Chemicals can do it. You got poor digestion that can do it as well. Poor diet.
Think about that for a second. Digestion is the key for activating the inflammatory response, for activating the immune cells. You have over 70% of your immune cells in your intestinal tract. So all you have to do is excite them, and then they'll secrete those inflammatory cytokines, which will then end up next stop in the liver, activating the Kupffer cells there, and the next stop after that in the brain, activating the microglia and opening up the blood-brain barrier. We now see there's a tight association with intestinal permeability and blood-brain barrier permeability.
Yeah, we've had a few speakers talk about that one.
Yeah.
Poor diet, smoking tobacco, things of that sort, all cause oxidative stress. Okay, now what does the oxidative stress have to do with depression?
So many different ways.
Okay.
Let's take a simple one that everybody will understand. Let's take, for example, tryptophan metabolism. So many people, when they're depressed, they'll take something called an SSRI, right? A selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And this is to keep serotonin around in the synapse longer, so you will actually have activation from serotonin, the feel-good neurotransmitter, right? Well, that feel-good neurotransmitter has to be made from something. There are building blocks for serotonin. The prime building block is tryptophan. Tryptophan, the least common amino acid in the human body. You're lucky if you're getting 1.5 grams a day. It's tough to have it around. So you really want to be efficient at turning tryptophan into things that you need for proper mood, like 5-HTP and serotonin. But guess what? The first step in the metabolic process, the biochemical step from taking tryptophan into 5-HTP, needs a cofactor.
Okay.
And that cofactor is called tetrahydrobiopterin. And this tetrahydrobiopterin, or BH4, interestingly enough, if you try and go buy it from a supplement company, you're going to have a tough time. Because BH4 is incredibly oxidant sensitive. It's so hard to stabilize that if you were to purchase that supplement, it'd be extremely expensive. They'd have to nitrogen pack it and put it in some sort of freezer container to get it to you. It's that unstable.
It's very prone to oxidative stress.
Very prone to oxidative stress. I mean, you can just flick it, look at it the wrong way, and all of a sudden, boom, it's donated its electrons somewhere else, and now it's in a form that it cannot help tryptophan go to 5-hydroxytryptophan.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, it's not just tryptophan in that process with BH4. The dopaminergic pathway, phenylalanine to tyrosine and tyrosine to dopa, also needs this cofactor, this BH4 cofactor, that's incredibly oxidant sensitive. So dopamine is known as the reward neurotransmitter. You feel accomplished in life. You feel secure with yourself. So now you're not happy, you're not secure, you're more likely to have depressive type symptoms.
Okay, so I want to make sure everybody understands that. So we want serotonin to make us nice and happy, but in order to get it, we need tryptophan. And tryptophan needs to turn into 5-HTP. 5-HTP turns into serotonin. But in order for the tryptophan to turn into the 5-HTP, so it can turn into serotonin, you need the BH4. Right? And if that BH4 is so prone to oxidative stress, if there's a lot of oxidative stress going on in the body, it damages that BH4 and it can't do its job. So you're not going to be as happy because you don't have the serotonin, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
That's one way.
Okay, one way. Give us another way.
We got another way.
Okay.
So in states of inflammation, in states of oxidative stress, you will upregulate certain enzymes, an enzyme called IDO. And this IDO enzyme actually will degrade tryptophan. So it pushes tryptophan, instead of turning into, this is called the serotonergic pathway we're dealing with now.
Okay.
Tryptophan to serotonin, called the serotonergic pathway. Instead of pushing tryptophan through the serotonergic pathway, when you have a lot of inflammation, when you're activating the microglia in the brain, for example, and you have chemical exposures, you've got stress, you have whatever it is that's activating the microglia, you have gut problems, right? Then you'll actually turn on these cytokines, IL-1, TNF-alpha, the ones you're familiar with, IL-6, and those will turn on this IDO enzyme. And this IDO enzyme then will, instead of taking tryptophan to serotonin, will take tryptophan down this kynurenin pathway. And the kynurenin pathway can actually end up producing something called quinolinate, or quinolinic acid. And this quinolinic acid, interestingly enough, is a toxin. It's neurotoxic. So you can have inflammation and you can produce a toxin. It actually binds to a very excitatory receptor in the brain called NMDA, and it can lead to anxious and depressive type symptoms. So you don't want to have too much inflammation around. You don't want to have too many inflammatory cytokines in the brain.
Cytokines produce inflammation?
Cytokines can activate enzymes. The enzymes can break down the actual tryptophan in this case. If the cytokines interact with other cells in a particular way, they can cause oxidative stress.
So the cytokines produce IDO? Or they
Cytokines stimulate the production of IDO.
stimulate the production of IDO, and so instead of tryptophan going down and making 5-HTP and making serotonin, the tryptophan instead gets turned into quinolytic acid by way of the IDO, and that's a neurotoxin, which is going to fry the brain even more, which causes more mood problems.
Absolutely. Now, there's one more factor.
Okay, bring it.
Okay. This is fascinating, really.
Yeah.
I saw this in the 50s, orthomolecular psychiatry, right? Abram Hoffer and Linus Pauling and whatnot. They were looking at the nicotinic acid. They were looking at niacin. And they were looking at how when a person was insufficient in niacin, actually, they will rob the body of tryptophan. It's fascinating, but that same kynurenine pathway, instead of producing quinolinic acid, can also produce niacin. So if somebody has a B3, vitamin B3 and niacin insufficiency, they'll use 60 milligrams of tryptophan to make 1 milligram of niacin. So if you have a niacin insufficiency, you can also rob this tryptophan. So, you've got quite a few strikes against tryptophan here. You want to make sure you don't have oxidative stress so tryptophan can go where it needs to go.
How common is that, a niacin or a B3 deficiency?
Unfortunately, these days it's gaining in popularity, but it would depend on the person and their dietary intake and their symptomology. But I would say I'm seeing about 10-15% of my population benefits from niacin supplementation.
Nice. You were telling me something off camera about the genetics of it all in MTHFR. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, sure. So there's an interesting component here, right, where a lot of people are looking at SAMe, right, S-adenosylmethionine.
What is that?
SAMe is the donator of one carbon, a methyl group called, it's C, and then H3 is just basically the name is a methyl group, or single carbon metabolism is what this pathway is called. And a lot of people are looking at genetics, and they're saying, hey, we've got a concern here. You've got your 5-MTHFR, you've got a 677C to T, SNP is what it's called, right? You have genetic issues, and therefore you're not producing enough of this very important methyl donor to give you SAMe to make different reactions occur that help mood tremendously, whether it's phosphatidylethanolamine to phosphatidylcholine, whatever it is that you're looking at for methylation reactions that improve mood. There's quite a few of them, actually.
And the viewers can learn more about that in Dr. Ben Lynch's talk.
Yes, okay. I'm sure they will. So the concentration is, if you have these genes, you're sunk. You're more likely to have depressive issues and whatnot. But my argument, Sean, is that in the last 14 years, we've seen a drastic rise in depression. We've seen use of these medications go up over 4 times. And our genes haven't been changing. So what has been changing? And there's a lot more oxidative stress. There's a lot more chemicals. There's a lot more busy schedules. There's a lot more reasons that people can have oxidative stress. And if you look at the research, you can show that when people have these genetics in certain parts of the world where they eat high folate-rich diets, and they're getting the activated folates from the diet, it's not so much of a concern for their disease risk rates.
That's exactly what Dr. Ben says, is to eat more leafy green vegetables so you can get the methylfolate.
Yes.
So you skip that whole process.
Yes.
That involves the MTHFR gene or enzyme.
Right. And at the same time you're consuming those greens, you're also getting a bunch of antioxidants, interestingly enough. But what I'm seeing in the literature is some nuance that no one's paying attention to. And that is 5-MTHF is an antioxidant. Methyl B12 is an antioxidant. So when you are supplementing these things, yes, they may become a cofactor for the formation of SAMe and methylation reactions, or they may be used up in the brain to quench superoxide radical, peroxynitrite. They're used as antioxidants. They'll actually donate their electrons to actually stabilize the brain in different ways. So while we're hypothesizing that a lot of the effect might be on this methylation in SAMe, it does have an effect, absolutely. But there's also a secondary component of oxidative stress. And no one's considering the fact that you may need to be recommending high levels of 5-MTHF to notice the benefit in depression because the person is under oxidative stress, because the person's gut is on fire from their food sensitivities, because this person is under a tremendous amount of stress, because the person is eating a non-organic diet that might be laden in pesticides. So there are other factors involved there as well.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. Now, chemicals. I want to get deeper into the causes. I know you're the guy when it comes to chemicals, and you covered some of the stats earlier. Talk more about that.
Okay, yep, we talked about the 74 billion pounds of chemicals being imported or produced every single day. The reality about chemicals is they can have an effect on so many different ways. One of the fascinating things I've been looking at in the autism community and elsewhere is how chemicals turn on enzymes. So you have phase 1 and phase 2 detox, right? You know about the cytochrome P450 hydroxylase enzymes, right? Same kind of class of enzymes that are activating the tryptophan. Interesting.
I know a little bit about it. Yeah. Our audience may not. You want to tell them what that means? Yeah.
Okay, let's simplify it ad nauseum, okay? So we'll say the primary 2 phases of detoxification everybody talks about are phase 1, which is have a toxin come into the body and you put a chemical handle on it. In this case, we're going to talk about a hydroxyl group. Okay. You put a chemical handle on it. Then these phase 2 compounds, we call them conjugates, will come in and grab the handle at the hydroxyl group, and they will create a more soluble substance between the toxin and this conjugate, and then they're able to be excreted out of the body. So phase 1 puts a handle on it. Okay. Phase 2 grabs the handle, pulls it out of the body, right? So phase 1, phase 2. When you have lots of chemicals around, the body upregulates the phase 1 enzyme pretty quickly, oftentimes. There are some things that reduce it, but the vast majority of the chemicals we're seeing in high concentrations will upregulate that phase 1 enzyme.
Okay, so more handles?
More handles.
Okay.
That's awesome, except for the fact that in that handle state, many of these toxins are actually more toxic, they're more reactive. So if you have the phase 2 to come and grab them and pull them out, you're golden. If you don't, you're in trouble. So I would say the primary concern I'm having is that I'm noticing that these hydroxylase enzymes are being upregulated in the wrong place sometimes. So in the case of BPA, for example, bisphenol A, that plasticizing agent I had mentioned earlier, the one that's now being used in billions of pounds a year.
And what is that in? Canned foods, right?
Canned linings, plastic bottles. It's on the cover of the actual receipts, that slippery stuff that you have that now it's probably coated in your pockets and your dollar bills and in your laundry. It's everywhere. Plastic packaging, oftentimes meats will come in plastic and will migrate. So yes, you can actually reduce your BPA exposure on a daily basis by eating something called a fresh food diet, where you don't have any canned foods, bottle foods, you don't cook in plasticware, and you don't eat anything that's wrapped in plastic. You can reduce BPA by over 50%. So it's phenomenal. Yeah, so BPA, plasticizing agent. What I see in the literature, it's fascinating, is that this BPA will come in and activate a hydroxylase, quote, phase 1 enzyme, but the hydroxylase phase 1 enzyme that's activated is called the 24-hydroxylase enzyme. And unfortunately, it's very reactive in something that you and I love to have around called vitamin D. Vitamin D, known as 25-hydroxylase, or the active hormone known as 1,25-dihydroxycholecalciferol. This is an important immune modulating substance, vitamin D. It can turn off inflammation, okay? But what happens is, and I'll get to that in just a second, let me tell you a story about that, but let's talk about the fact that when you have BPA around and you upregulate this 24-hydroxylase, it starts going around and puts 24-hydroxylase, the hydroxyl group, on vitamin D. So instead of having 25-hydroxycholecalciferol, you now have 24-25-hydroxycholecalciferol, and the body looks at that and says, I can't use that. I'm going to degrade it. So what I'm trying to tell you is you have certain chemicals around, you degrade certain nutrients. In this case, we're talking about vitamin D.
So the vitamin D, which could be quenching the inflammation, gets attached to that 24-hydroxylase, and body can't use it.
Vitamin D is now known as one of the most potent immune modulator substances on the planet.
You want it to be available.
Right.
Right. Okay.
In the mid to late 2000s, I was actually at University of Wisconsin Madison campus, and I interviewed Dr. Colleen Hayes. And she was looking at research back then on how she could turn off an animal model of MS, of inflammatory autoimmune responses in the brain of these rats, just with vitamin D. And she disclosed something to us fascinating, Sean. She said, it looks like the human body has about 48 hours. We give ourselves 48 hours. When we have an insult, we have whatever it is, we'll let our body ramp up inflammation. We'll let it ramp up these immune cell activities for about 48 hours. Then each cell, and the immune cells themselves, will turn on this 1-hydroxylase enzyme. And then all of a sudden they produce the 1,25-hydroxy or dihydroxycholecalciferol, the active steroid hormone, vitamin D. Mm-hmm. And that changes the behavior of the immune cells. Now the immune cells will migrate out of the central nervous system. Now some immune cells will apoptose, they'll kill themselves. So she said, in essence, Tom, it appears as though vitamin D is an inflammatory turn-off switch. Mm-hmm. And we can actually calm down the inflammatory response in the brain with vitamin D. Now, if we have chemicals in our environment rapidly increasing every single year, I mean, you can't have billions of pounds of a substance and not have residues start appearing in breast milk and in urine and everybody's blood all over the place. That's what's happening now. Mm-hmm. And no one's associating the fact that we're now having, number one, a degradation of vitamin D, and now number two, an alteration of all sorts of different, we're seeing hormonal responses and everything else from these chemical substances.
That was an injectable vitamin D, right?
That was in that particular study.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So high dose?
Well, it's not necessarily high dose. You just need to make sure that you keep your 25-hydroxy-D levels in a range that would be what would be considered therapeutic. And many people would argue that was about a 40 to 60 nanogram per ml range.
Okay. So that's that phase 1, correct? What about the phase 2? What can we do about that?
Here's the exciting stuff. I mean, honestly, Sean, if you look at the research right now, it's really hopeful because a lot of people are showing that inflammation, oxidation in the brain are behind depression. That's where we're going next. Mm-hmm. We're going to turning down the inflammatory response. We're going to reducing the amount of oxidants in the brain. And that would include then getting rid of some of these toxins, right? Well, there's thankfully a phenomenal substance found in nature that can do many of these things. Okay? This is coming from the research at Johns Hopkins University, 1992, Paul Talley, Dr. Kang. They've done it brilliantly at pointing out the fact that a compound called sulforaphane found in broccoli sprouts, you've heard of the cruciferous family of vegetable, mm-hmm. broccoli, kale, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, radishes, arugula. All of these things have this sulforaphane compound, broccoli sprouts by far the highest. And this sulforaphane compound does something fascinating. When you have it in your cells, it can go down and it will bind to a substance called KEAP1 that's hoarding or attached to something called NRF2. You've heard about NRF2.
Right.
Once it binds to that KEAP1, it lets go of the NRF2. The NRF2 then migrates down into the nucleus of the cell and binds to something called the antioxidant response element. This antioxidant response element is basically a treasure trove of your book of life. Mm-hmm. It starts reading these amazing proteins that help with antioxidant function, amazing proteins with detoxification function. They are the primary phase 2 conjugate proteins you need to grab onto that handle, pull the toxins out. But at the same time, they're working on glutathione transferase, glutathione peroxidase, quinone reductase, thyroid reductase, all of these amazing antioxidant replenishing proteins as well. Mm-hmm. So you get antioxidant protection and you get detoxification proteins to pull toxins out. It seems to be the magic 1-2 combination. In fact, I'm seeing some preliminary data now showing that they're going to start looking at sulforaphane for major depressive disorders.
So that would be glutathione, SOD, those antioxidant enzymes?
Absolutely.
Okay, now how are those antioxidant enzymes? So let me just do a quick review.
Yeah.
Toxin comes in, put a chemical handle on it, it goes to phase 2. So sulforaphane helps to increase those antioxidant enzymes that pull them out of the body.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Phase 2 detoxification enzymes.
So they're the ones grabbing the handle and
Absolutely.
pulling them out. So you want to make sure those things are high. Now those are antioxidant enzymes. How is that different from taking antioxidants in supplements or taking them in food?
Huge difference.
Okay.
Absolutely huge difference. So what's the most common antioxidant everybody takes?
Vitamin C.
Vitamin C. Okay. Let's take that as an example. So vitamin C, if you consume orange juice, for example, I'm drinking my orange juice, I'm getting my vitamin C. You'll take that in, and you'll have antioxidant protection from that vitamin C for about 6 hours. And the reality is what happens is you're on a 1-to-1 battle ratio. You have one free radical that's missing an electron, and you have one antioxidant that donates the electron. Okay, so free radical, antioxidant. Boom, 1-to-1 ratio, interaction is done.
Right.
Once you've used up all that vitamin C, done. 6 hours, done.
Okay.
Right? What I'm talking about is ramping up each and every cell's ability to produce antioxidant and detoxification enzymes for 94 plus hours.
That's a big difference.
Days and days at a time. Okay, so one single consumption of a quarter cup of broccoli sprouts is going to ramp up your enzyme capacity for days, not just hours. So it's a total different ballgame.
So it sounds like the to-do list here is this: reduce inflammation.
Absolutely.
That's number one. Talk about curcuminoids.
Oh my gosh. So the data on curcuminoids is just rock solid, man. In fact, if you were to have the magic 1-2 punch, I would be doing curcuminoids and sulforaphane. In fact, you can see that in the literature. It's phenomenal for cutting down on cancer and other things. But we should be looking at depression for these things. We're now seeing the definitions are oxidative inflammatory disorders in the brain. So why in the world, why are we looking at that? Because it makes a huge difference in my clients. But my gosh, there are these curcuminoid compounds that we know. Some of them have better absorption than others. And they will knock out NF-kappa B, the primary master switch of the inflammatory response. In fact, there was a recent study that was comparing acetaminophen with the Mariva, which is a specific curcuminoid compound. And my gosh, you know, is almost an identical similarity in reducing pain. So you can actually reduce pain with this as well.
So what are the curcuminoids? Turmeric?
So the curcuminoids are actually extractives from turmeric. So turmeric is the mother base, and then you extract the curcuminoids out that have the very potent anti-inflammatory NF-kappa B inhibiting compounds.
So if somebody wanted to get more in their diet, what would they eat? That's what I'm getting at.
Oh, excellent. Well, curries.
Okay.
Absolutely. And if you have that curry with a little bit of coconut milk, like traditionally eaten, and then some peppers on top of that, the regular black pepper, it will increase the absorption of some of these curcuminoids.
Gotcha. So reduce inflammation by getting more curcuminoids in your diet or through supplementation. Reduce oxidative stress by way of taking in more sulforaphane. Okay. What are the sources of sulforaphane?
Sulforaphane primarily comes from the cruciferous family of vegetables. So broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, arugula, radishes. One of the highest sources, though, are broccoli sprouts. I love that. I have a video on my website. People can check it out. But I love growing broccoli sprouts in my kitchen. I love sharing those with people because really it takes very little. Quarter cup a day, phenomenal changes.
That was a TED Talk, right?
I did do a TED Talk on broccoli, the DNA whisperer. Yeah.
Check that one out. How much would it help to get more sunlight to increase your vitamin D?
Oh, tremendously. Absolutely tremendously. So the interesting piece is everybody was thinking that it was seasonal affective disorder. They thought, you know, when you give people the supplemental vitamin D or you recommend sun exposure, your mood improves across the board. And everybody's like, oh, well, maybe it's the sunlight and you're affecting neurotransmitter function through the retina. Yes, that's part of the equation. But you're also modulating the inflammatory response in the brain. And when you modulate that inflammatory response, you reduce the radicals, you increase the production of some of the beneficial neurotransmitters.
What if you live, here somewhere like in Seattle where you don't get a lot of sunlight? Supplement with vitamin D?
Absolutely, supplementation
find out what your levels are.
You know, grassrootshealth.org, I don't know if you've been to that website, but it's pretty phenomenal. It's Carol Bagerly. She had breast cancer. She did a bunch of research, realized that you can reduce cancer rates with adequate vitamin D because it changes immune function, right? So she said, wow, I'm going to have this research paper written on this eventually. I'm going to bring in as many people as I can, test their vitamin D levels, and then I'm going to tell them where they stand in the general populace, how much supplementation they need to get to the ideal levels. So she has these killer charts on her website, and it shows you if you're at 20 nanograms per ml right now, that you should be taking approximately 5,000 IUs per day, and then you can expect within X amount of weeks' time to have an increase. It's brilliant. So grassrootshealth.org, you can get tested there. You can find out your results.
Do you have any resources for people who want to reduce their toxic load?
Oh my gosh, you kidding? Resources? Well, EWG is awesome. So in the environmental working group, they have a lot of different things on cosmetics. They talk about what's going on in the house. They talk about a lot of different things. So, the Clean 15, the Dirty Dozen, that comes from the environmental working group. Yep. We're doing podcasts. We're doing all sorts of different information on our website as well. So we're happy to share that. I honestly think that health for the future is going to be related tightly to how much toxic exposure we're having and how much we're not. We see that in China, right, with the air pollution. the radical rise in disease. It's shocking to me what you can get. You'll get increased depression, anxiety, autism. You're having all these cardiovascular diseases and disorders because of the pollution. So I think looking at toxins really is kind of the medicine of the future.
Okay. And of course, eat real food, right? Organic food.
Are you kidding me? Eating real foods is the way to go. If you're eating organic real foods, you get so many signaling molecules from it that will change your gene expression and your inflammatory response.
I dig it. You were also talking off camera about brainwashing and sleep. Why is that important?
Man, I think it's fascinating, right? There's research that's just coming out. It's saying, like, you know, why in the world? Like, humans don't have claws. We don't have these sharp teeth. We don't have real sharp hearing like some of the animal kingdom. And yet we knock ourselves out for like 8 hours a night and we leave ourselves susceptible to prey. Like, why evolutionarily would we choose to get knocked out? So they're trying to find these reasons. And it turns out that when we're in those deep states of sleep, you know, the delta sleep and whatnot, we'll actually start to wash our brains. We actually take some of our circulatory channels and shut them down for blood and whatnot, and we'll open up these fluid channels around the neurons, and we'll actually flush out things that have been accumulating there. Toxins, for example, things like beta amyloid plaques, actually. They're seeing that Alzheimer's disease risk is now reduced based on sleep, and now they know why, because we have it's like a car wash. At nighttime, we shut our brain down so we can brainwash.
Does it have to be nighttime? What if someone sleeps during the day? They have
well, if you sleep during the day, the importance is the deep sleep. So if you're working with your melatonin cycles and you're getting deep sleep, that's fine. But if you're not, you know, that's the problem. I mean, some people are having constant excitatory signals in their brain because of oxidative stress, because of excessive quinolinic acid, and they're getting this wired and tired mode. You know, they get sleep, but they don't feel rested. So yeah, it's letting go of those excitatory signals and getting really deep down into the sleep.
I feel like we kind of flew through this.
Yeah, man.
Anything else you want to talk about?
It's just great to have you here, man. I wish I could take you hiking, but I know you got a tight schedule.
You got to get out of here, get to the airport. Well, let's talk about your website. It's wholelifenutrition.com. You said you have resources
.net,
about
yeah.
.net.
Yep.
Wholelifenutrition.net. You have resources over there about the elimination diet book that you put out. Toxins. What else?
Well, we mentioned all the things people need to know about going gluten-free, and basically we're getting into everything that I'm talking about here. We talk about vitamin D and toxicity. We talk about all the importance of broccoli sprouts. We talk about consuming coconut water, for example, for hydration. We're going to be talking about sleep. We talk about all sorts of different things there. So anything that you hear me talking about, it will be mentioned on the site.
You've got a couple of programs over there as well. You have the elimination diet program, and you also have a progressive practitioner program. Talk about the two of those.
Yeah, well, the elimination diet program is basically, elimination diets are probably the most potent functional medicine tool on the planet, but they're not easy for some people. Some people need support. Some people need recipes. Some people need webinars with me, Q&A time with me, audio support via MP3. So that's what the elimination diet program is. I walk you through the elimination diet, and I guarantee success. I mean, you will have a fun time, feel better, enjoy your process. So that's awesome. The other thing is we've got this amazing practitioner coaching program that I put together where I've just sucked in all the knowledge from Walter Crinian and Dr. K, and wherever I go, I look at the research, I put it together in these presentations that get to the root of why people are suffering from irritable bowel, why people are suffering from depression, why. We answer all those. We go into the molecular mechanisms. I pass you the research studies. We look at case studies, and then we have dialogue. It's fun. It's really fun.
Very good. Again, that's wholelifenutrition.net. Yeah. Tom, thanks so much. Great stuff.
Pleasure, Sean. Nice to see you, man.
Likewise.
Yeah.